All right, hi guys. So this is the belated week 4 lecture for RD1. The last in the sequence of 2 on how fields develop. And originally this would be a quite an active session. If we were meeting in person, basically there'd be kind of half an hour of me talking and then a bunch of small group work, kind of like we did in week 0. But we don't have that. We've instead got me talking to a camera and you guys sitting at home. So what we'll do is do this little kind of 20 minutes, half an hour of me talking. And then when we meet in the office hours, we can bring up some of the things that I talk about here and some of the exercises that we have in mind for you. And we can do them if you so desire. But essentially the purpose of today is to finish off today. I keep on doing that when I record these lectures. The purpose of this video is to finish off the sequence of thinking about you and your role and your position as a researcher in terms of your field or your fields of research. And a few people have said to us, you're not really sure what we mean by field of research. And it's, I guess, to be completely honest with you, it's pretty amorphous. What a field of research is, as I went into in the last video, at the very least is a collection of problems and paradigms and positions. And as I'll talk to you about in this video, it's also a collection of humans. And it may be the case, in fact it probably is the case, that you don't really know what your field is yet. And you're probably also thinking, what I need to search for a name for this field. And often there really aren't names. You kind of end up, your field ends up, or you end up being in multiple fields. Like, let's take me, for example. My PhD was in religious studies, but the areas of the world, like the things that happened in the universe that I was interested in, coincided really strongly with tourism studies. So I was kind of 1 foot in religious studies, 1 foot in tourism studies. Then, as my career began to develop, I ended up moving over into kind of a little bit into psychology and into neuroscience. Not that I did any experimental neuroscientific work myself, but I was part of teams that were doing that. So I've got like a toe in neuroscience and a toe in psychology and feet in religious studies and tourism studies. I'm not sure where this metaphor is going, but you see what I mean? Like, you join with other people trying to figure out stuff in the world. And it's important that you understand that those boundaries, if there are any boundaries between fields, are really, really loose and are really what we would call contingent. They're really highly contextually contingent. They depend on like where you are in time. That is, at a different period in time, fields kind of constitute themselves differently. They're interested in different things, different problems in the world. And of course, they're made up of different people. So Jack and I have this sequence of 2 lectures in RD1 to help you to think about what fields you will be in with your work. Because one of the things that helped us set up the MRes and RD1 as it got going was thinking about what our experience had been like as graduate students and what a lot of our friends and colleagues talked to us about in terms of their own experience as graduate students being new to the world of research. And one of the most frequent things that we heard was comments about thinking about, where do I belong, essentially, and that were accompanied by, I wish somebody had told me. I wish somebody had told me just how to think about what a field of research is. Because field there, when we, again, just to underscore it and italicize and bold it, I suppose, like a field is a really loose term That you just mean, usually when people say field of research, they probably don't think about it carefully enough, like even me, and they're just using that word field really loosely, as in some kind of collection over there that I'm thinking of that you might not be able to discern. The purpose of this sequence in RD1 is to give you some tools of thought with which to think about what a field might constitute. So last week, when we talked about last week, there I am again. I can't get away from the paradigm of time. Last week, I just did it again. Last lecture, ladies and gentlemen. We talked about fields of research as question-directed. That is, interested in certain things in the world and certain kinds of problems to do with those things. And that's a really useful way. It's probably the way that most people think about a field of research. When you think of, religious studies, that's people who study stuff that we call religions or religious. When you think about biology, it's the study of life or living things. Geography, history, like it's kind of subject matter oriented. And that's what the last lecture, I avoided time. That's what the last recorded lecture was about. Was thinking about a field of research as a collection of problems about stuff in the world, about particular stuff in the world, and that because there was this focus on particular stuff, certain ways of interpreting that stuff in the world, those events, those things, arose, and people developed theories and ways of examining those things and events in the world. And I called those paradigms, kind of riffing from Kuhn, paradigms, problems, and positions. That was one of that kind of tripartite was one of the ways that we could think about a field of research as a collection of problems, of positions, that is theories, and paradigms, that is ways of thinking about the world. But this week, what we're interested in doing is thinking about a field of research as a collection of conversations, as a collection of conferences, and as a collection of communities, or as a community. And we'll go into that thinking about what all of this means. But I suppose underscoring all of this in this lecture, I said this week before, didn't I? In this lecture is the notion that what we're dealing with when we talk about a field of research is a group of human beings. And that makes it a social enterprise. And so thinking about a field of research in this way is a necessarily sociological exercise. Just like I if we wanted to know about the way genes worked, we would have to do genetics, or study of genetics. We'd have to study genes to find out about that. So too, if we think about a field of research as a collection of humans, we have to do sociological work to find out about that. This is one of the things that we're really keen on emphasizing for you in RD1, is that your question, the thing that you're interested in, largely determines the method that you will use. That's why in the last lecture we went into fields of research as collections of interest in certain things in the world, because interest in certain things and certain phenomena largely determines method. But here, when we're thinking about a field as a group of people and as a group of interactions between people, we begin to understand how important the communicative aspect of a field of research is. And so that's where we begin to get some assistance from theories in the humanities and the social sciences for thinking about fields of research in this way. And the main one that I'm interested in today is this notion of what's called a community of discourse. you also might see it referred to, it's a little bit different, but you also might see it referred to as a community of practice. And what we're talking about there, I prefer for our purposes here, a community of discourse, because one of the things that we emphasize for you in RD1 is that we are writers and readers. Primarily, all of us engaged in research are professional writers. And so that notion of a field of research as a community of discourse underscores that for me, because discourse means communication. Discourse is what I'm doing right now, for example. So this notion of a discourse community is what helps us to think about a field of research, and I think this is really important for you as people new to the world of research, because what you can begin to do if you with this understanding is look actively for the acts of discourse, for those acts of communication in your field, and figure out where you want to place yourself, and that's really vital. So we have this notion of a discourse community as being a textual system with stated and unstated conventions. So I guess it's worth unpacking that for a second. A textual system means a system of communication via text. Text there doesn't mean just kind of letters on a page. Text means anything recorded, I suppose. So you could include in text. This can be a little bit confusing sometimes for people from outside of this particular field of in the humanities, in fields like reception studies and discourse analysis and stuff like that. Discourse analysis is a method rather than a field. Is that text can mean video, text can mean audio recording, text can mean pictures, but text can also mean documents, written word stuff. So we've got a system of text, at least the production, if not communication via text. But then the end of that quote, with stated and unstated conventions. So that is, we have this system going on, and some of the conventions of that production and communication will be clear. That is, anyone coming into that system, will be able to kind of read or view the conventions of that field. But, and this is really important for us, there's also unstated conventions, or what we might call implicit conventions, implicit rules about the way that we do things. In education, that's sometimes referred to as the hidden curriculum, stuff that you're expected to know as a student, but nobody actually tells you that you're expected to know it. This is largely what RD1 is. RD1 is an exercise on the part of me and Jack and many colleagues around the university in unveiling the hidden curriculum of postgraduate work, postgraduate research studies in particular. We're trying to tell you what a lot of the unstated conventions of being a postgrad researcher are. So, that's a pretty straightforward observation, I would say. Like, even the observation that a field of research is a group of humans is a really straightforward, unsurprising observation about the world. But one of the things that's important for us all to do, I think, is to really unpack what that simple observation means. Like, what are the implications of that? What are the implications of thinking about understanding a field of research as a group of humans who are engaged in discourse, who are engaged in conversations with each other? And that's where we get people in social sciences and the humanities who've done work on discourse communities, unpacking this notion of, well, if we start to think about a discourse community as having stated and unstated conventions, and we kind of develop that a little bit, what we end up here with is a bit of a richer list. And this probably looks more familiar to you rather than stated and unstated conventions. So a field of research as a group of humans has things like common goals, And I've got the term there, like broadly agreed common goals. That doesn't mean necessarily that people have sat down and formally agreed upon them, because we're riffing off that above statement about stated and unstated conventions. Some of the common goals will be common by virtue of being voted upon, being agreed upon explicitly by people, but other goals will be implicit. They'll be assumed to be goals of the field, what we're trying to do. A discourse community has a mechanism of communication between members. If you think about what an academic, a research discourse community would be, well, that would be journal articles in your field. And the broadly agreed common goals would be, we want to find out stuff about this particular thing or this particular phenomenon or phenomena. If we then think about the third element, using participatory mechanisms for feedback, in our case, peer review. But we also have other things that we'll talk about today, things like conferences, ways for people to get together and initiate a loop of conversation whereby they speak and the other person speaks back to them. The fourth element, using and owning a genre of communication. That's pretty interesting, a genre of communication. In the academic world, we have, of course, journal articles, and academic articles are their own thing. Various fields have their own different ways of doing that communication. But one of the things that non-academics frequently comment on is how obscure and how difficult to read academic texts, scientific, scholarly, whatever texts are. And part of that is the fifth element. In addition to the genre of communication, and the genre of communication, I suppose, to develop that a little bit more, is some of the stuff that we were talking about in week one, that there are conventions of presentation and particularly for academic styles of referencing, that is of citing evidence and referring to other work. That's one of the distinctive elements of the genre of academic communication, broadly and differently constituted across various disciplines and fields. But then a specific lexicon. We often hear about jargon, and jargon being a bad thing. Jargon is not a bad thing. Jargon is a good thing. It depends on how you use jargon as to whether it's a good or a bad thing, right? But one of the things that characterizes academic work in a particular field or discipline is its jargon, is its terminology, is its lexicon. A lexicon is a collection of words that you use. Jack and I have been developing the Jalexicon, that is the lexicon of terms that he and I have invented. More on that soon, maybe a special website. And then finally, maintains a threshold for membership. And this probably is really familiar to all of us, right? In the first instance, we've got bachelor's degrees and then postgraduate degrees, master's and PhD degrees. But then we also have things like maintaining a certain standard of quality. That is, the peer review system, which is the mechanism for feedback, ensures that the discourse that goes on in the field, sorry, I'm kind of realised I was swirling around like that, and that might not make any sense. The discourse that occurs in the field is of a certain quality, certain standard, I suppose. And that maintaining that standard for you individually and the community itself is very important. It's one of the ways that it characterizes itself. So this is the kind of theoretical framework with which I'm approaching this topic or this problem of how do we understand a field of research? When people use that phrase, my field of research is, or this research contributes to the field of research X. What do they mean by that? And so when somebody talks about that, and I think I encourage you to do the same, kind kind of little text box appears next to your head, and you're thinking, cool, okay, they've said the word field of research. So what they mean is a community of discourse that has broadly agreed common goals, a mechanism of communication, some kind of feedback mechanism, a genre of communication, a specific group of words that is a lexicon, and some kind of threshold for membership. And interestingly, on that last point, the threshold for membership, remember Kuhn, any of you might have picked up that towards the, I think it's in the epilogue of Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, he asks the question about who's responsible for policing a field of research. How ought we understand it? He poses a bunch of really interesting questions at the end of Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Kuhn, including kind of tying up, sorry to kind of digress, but including tying up an analogue that he makes in the book that we ought to understand a field of research in the same kind of way that we understand a species. That is that it's something that evolves over time, and that it evolves to be fit for the environment that it's in. It's not about getting, it doesn't have a telos in mind. And one of the things that Kuhn says is really interesting about how difficult people find his thesis is that people often think of research as being kind of goal-oriented, like we're looking towards this kind of pinnacle of finding out everything about the universe. And at least in our particular field of research, we're kind of accumulating knowledge, kind of like that. And Kuhn's thesis, he says, is no, that's the wrong way to think about it. Nature doesn't care. We are part of nature. And that a field of research is just a group of people interested in a group of problems. And that both of those problems and those people evolve over time just to answer the context in which they're in. Really interesting part of the end of Kuhn's book. You should go and read it. But so anytime anyone mentions this phrase, field of research, or when you read it or when you think about it yourself, like, bing, this theoretical framework should pop up for you. Common goals, common lexicon, mechanism of communication and feedback, threshold of membership and participation. What does that mean for us, though, in terms of being researchers new to the game of research and new to our own fields of research? You might be thinking, cool, I understand that, but like, how do I do this? How do I sketch where I am so that I can understand what fields I'm in and what conversations I'm participating in? Friends, I have you covered. So that's why I've characterized a field of research or fields of research for the purposes of this lecture as conversations, conferences, and communities. And the first one, conversations, is that discourse, that textual system. That is the first place that you look to find out where am I, what fields am I in, is the work that you're reading for your project, and for the kinds of topics that you're interested in. So you look to journal articles and books. That was one of the great revelations for me as a postgraduate, was stopping understanding journal articles and books as kind of utterances, made without context, and starting to understand them instead as a bunch of colleagues speaking to the other colleagues, as having a conversation with the other colleagues in their field. Like, I remember it happening in the very early part of my PhD, that as soon as I understood that, I suddenly understood why certain things were happening and had happened over time in my fields of research. And it made it much easier to read articles, because it was like it was all of a sudden like I understood that I was listening in on a conversation as a reader, and that authors were kind of pointing at certain people. That's what references are, when they were making certain claims, but kind of gesturing to everyone when they were making other kinds of claims. So you look for the conversations that are active in your field. And that means reading journal articles, reading book, look at the work that makes up what you're interested in, the kinds of problems and topics that you're interested in. And the function of this, like why it's a good thing to do, is that most academic writing is intended to help people who are interested in similar topics. That is all that kind of gesturing to the other people, the conversation that's going on, is one colleague saying to other colleagues, I think you ought to think about the world in this particular way, because if you do, you'll be able to think about the problems that you're interested in a better way. And I've used this phrase before, that when we write, what we're trying to do is help our readers understand something, to better understand something that they want to understand well, right? So that's what we're interested in as researchers, is understanding the world really well. And our written work, our text, helps our readers do that. That is really vital to keep in mind, that service element of academic writing. And so the tip for you as new researchers, or the tips, the kind of the suggestions, the instructions are like, they're really simple, but they are hugely helpful. Make a list of the journals that articles to which you frequently refer appear in. That is, if you're referring to Cell frequently, the journal Cell, or one of the Cell journals, in your work a lot, like, make a note of that, because that means that a lot of the conversations that are occurring in your what will be your field are happening there. You should also make start to make a list of the terms that come up a lot in these conversations, terms that strike you as unique. I think it was Jack who was saying that in week 0 that one of the things you should do is like make a list of words that are frequently used, because those words and terms then become like a glossary that you refer to as you go on and use. And one of the reasons we want to make a list of terms like this that are unique to your field is because we're dealing with other groups of humans, and because we're dealing with a conversation. And one of the ways that we know from basic social psychology that is a way to ingratiate yourself to other people is mimicry. You mimic body language, or you mimic, here, key terms and phrases. Again, hugely basic, simple observation, right? A field of research has particular terms that it uses, but when you think about the implications of that, it's really, really important, because the implication for you as a newcomer is that it's worthwhile you, A, noting those terms, and B, starting to use them, get familiar with using them, find out what they mean and what they themselves imply in terms of the way you think about the world, and so on. And finally, on this topic of conversations, of course, note down the authors, like who comes up a lot, who are you referring to a lot, who do other people refer to a lot. That gives you a sense of who are the active speakers in the field at the moment, and gives you a strong indication of who you ought to be referring to. And remembering that reference isn't just showing, evidence of, that you didn't plagiarize. Referencing here as a postgraduate is speaking to another person, gathering them around you and saying, I'm speaking to you and you and you, and here is what I have to say. Really, really vital. So you want to make sure that you keep track of who the people are. So it's going to make a list of the journals to which you frequently refer, and the academic publishing houses of books that you come across a lot. Like, might be in your field that Ashgate and Springer come up a lot, for example, or Oxford University Press and Chicago University Press, or whatever. And the journals as well. Make a list of key terms, make a list of key people who come up a lot. Really simple, straightforward stuff, but really, really, really useful when it comes to giving yourself the kind of building blocks with which to enter that field of research. Remembering that your entree into that field of research is your thesis, that active communication and conversation that you put out to the field, and that acts as your threshold for membership into that field. Next, conferences. Conferences are really, really interesting events. For me, as a sociologist, really interesting because they're groups of humans getting together. Sociology, by the way, is the study of allies. That's what the word sociology means, or the account of allies. The account of groups of people who align themselves with each other. That's what a society is. A society is a group of people who live together in the same kind of way. And conferences are really interesting because that's where groups of people who are interested in the same things, who align themselves with each other, gather together. And in the academic world, often kind of fight bitterly over, theories and methods and findings and stuff like that. I say fight bitterly, but what I mean is discuss vigorously, I suppose. So conferences. Of course, we all know that conferences are where people in a field of research gather together and share their knowledge. That, of course, is one of the great misinterpretations of what the purpose of a conference is. The function of a conference for a field of research is to network. We say, of course, that it's to present work. And of course, the presentation of work does take place at conferences. But the real function of a conference is for those members of the community to get together and to commune. It's like that is such an interesting observation for us that, we see it right now with coronavirus, right? That one of the things that many of us find challenging is that we aren't able to get together with the people of our community. It's a really important human need, and it takes place in research as well. It's really important for groups of humans who align themselves to get together. And so that's what conferences are. They're opportunities for colleagues in the same field of research or the same area of research, the same discipline, to get together and, yes, of course, to share research, but also to exchange ideas and to share experience and to learn common language and to reinforce values and do the stuff that is community, add effervescence, collective effervescence, to kind of refer to Durkheim, which of course is something that we all must do daily, to add life to the community. So what do we do as new researchers? Well, we start looking for those conferences. Again, it might be kind of straightforward and simple, but you might not have even thought about going to a conference yet. I have to say to you, do. You might not be able to go in person, of course, at the moment, but if you can attend virtually, that'll be really beneficial for you. And as soon as the kind of lockdown restrictions upon us are able to be lifted, you should try and get to a conference as soon as you can. Because one of the things that you'll see is people doing and being a person in that field of research, and you can learn to mimic again, and you can make connections with people and develop relationships with people. It's the relationships with people that will get you jobs. It's relationships with people that will get you co-authorships. Really, really vital. So make a list, like what are the conferences that take place in your field of research? If you don't know where to look for conferences, how to find conferences, like start with your supervisor. Ask your supervisor, like what conferences should I be keeping an eye on? But also look at the professional organisations. That links to the next point about communities that I'm going to talk about. Look for the professional organisation. So for me, for example, in Australia, it's the Australian Association for the Study of Religions and the Australian Sociological Association. Like two of amongst many that I would make a list of, like the kind of gatherings, the conferences that occur. But again, to link with the previous point, the key people, like who goes to these conferences. You can look this up online a lot of the time. You can look at the programs for conferences. Many conferences produce proceedings, which is publications of the papers that are presented there. And a lot of conferences, of course, have video that you can watch on YouTube or library or Vimeo or whatever. So yeah, make a list of conferences, make a list of the people who go to those conferences, and pay attention to what's talked about there, because what's talked about at conferences, of course, apart from the networking element, which is the most important element of conferences. The presentation of work, of course, is really important because this is new work. The work that is presented at conferences is the stuff that's going on right now, the kind of new stuff that hasn't even reached publication yet. So really important to pay attention to as well. And finally, linking from the last topic, so we had kind of the start of it was conversations, that is people speaking to each other in text, and then the people then come together to confer in person or virtually, as the case may be. And those people confer on a communal kind of level, and then thinking about conferring on a communal level, they then form transnational or transregional, at the very least, groups who are interested in subject matter and method and discourse. Communities are, of course, groups of people, events, language, problems, forms of discussion, research methods, a community of discourse. What's the function of a community? The function of a community in a context of a field of research is to arrange it, to bring it together. That bring it being the research that takes place in that field, bring it together in a way that makes the community an identifiable thing. And so the most obvious way that this is done is through, as I mentioned in the previous topic, the formation of professional bodies. The Australian Association for the Study of Religions, the American Medical Association, the International Association for the History of Religions, like bodies like that, big bodies that are made up of volunteer members of the community who volunteer their time for the purposes of maintaining a community. It's a vital mechanism with which the community becomes identifiable, gives authority to the community, gives authority to the field of research in this particular case, and helps researchers to, and this can be a good and bad thing, helps researchers to differentiate themselves from other researchers. People are doing research on similar but different topics or ways, methods of doing things. And so the tip here, of course, is to look for those professional organisations. Like find out what are the, again, ask your supervisor, like what professional organisations, what associations should I be interested in? Should I consider joining any? I'm a member of the AASR, the Australian Association for the Study of Religions, and the Australian Sociological Association, TASA, as we call it. And I've been a member of a few others over the years as well. So ask your supervisor which professional organisations are out there, but also start looking at government as well, and local government and community bodies. Because oftentimes our research will cross over, because we're thinking about our field of research now up at the level of community. Other participants, other stakeholders in that community will be out in the rest of society, not just in the academy. And so we want to look for ways where our field of research crosses over into those things. This is more of the I suppose at the applied end, but it also is not just about the application of the knowledge that you create, but the application of the skills that you have as a member of that field of research, the kinds of critical analysis that you can do, the kinds of thinking that you can do that can be a benefit to people in government, community, and commerce, industry. So again, like a really straightforward tip, and what we would do normally in a class now is break out into small groups and start doing the first thing, looking at journal articles and starting to pick out authors' terms and the names of the journals themselves. And then we'd skip through and start looking for conferences, and then we would skip through and look at professional bodies, just as a way of trying to actualize this. So hopefully what we can do is a little bit of this in the office hours on Tuesday mornings from now. If you want to do that, like, feel free. We'll certainly do it for this coming Tuesday, which will be the 5th, 6th, 7th of April. 2020, if you're watching this way into the future. What does all of this mean, of course, for us as writers, us as researchers? I suppose it would come as no surprise that what we're interested in are these two things. We're interested in readers and the problems that readers have. Problems, what I mean is stuff that they want to figure out, stuff that they want to be able to think about clearly in the world. Our duty in terms of, or the reason why we're thinking about a field of research as a group of communities, conversations, conferences and communities, is a way of understanding the first element in that sentence, the readers. Last week we were dealing with problems. And that pair, reader and problem, if we can grapple with and grasp that pair, if we can understand who our readers are and what the problems are that they want to resolve, as a researcher, a lot of our work is done, because then we can focus our own research in a way that speaks to both of those things. It helps resolve the problems, but also speaks to the readers who can benefit from those problems being solved. And of course, the pro tip there is to read a lot and write a lot. Write in a way that you practice trying to be a person in that field, using the key terms, the phrases, referring to the people that you ought to refer to, the people who are interested in similar things, but also publishing. You know, your thesis, if you're going to write one, is an act of publication, but you're perfectly entitled to want to and to go ahead and do journal article publication before your thesis. Many MRes students have done that over the years. It was something I did as a postgrad as well. I published my first journal article just before I started my PhD. And it's a way of entering into the conversation with people. It's a really scary thing to do the first time, but I found it really helpful for me, kind of building my confidence in myself as a researcher, but also then taking myself seriously. Now that I was part, I remember kind of when I had that revelation about understanding my field of research as a kind of group of conversations going on. I also understood myself as a participant. You know, I understood my PhD was going to be an active participation in that, but also the journal article that I'd published was me beginning to participate. Writing is thinking. Read a lot. Somebody had a great note for us in one of their learning journals, which was that I need to remember something like I need to remember that I need to read with a pen, which I think is a great metaphor. That when you're reading, you're really only absorbing the information for most of us if you're writing at the same time. And so when you're reading and making notes, make notes as if you're in conversation with that author or those authors. Because that way the notes that you will make will be good notes that are or more likely to be good notes that are able to be put into work that you need to publish or produce for others. And so that's it. It's a bit of a simple lecture that I've talked a lot through. For any of you watching along at home that have never got in contact with me before, there are my contact details. These slides, I should say, I don't like using PowerPoint very much. These slides were written in R and using the package Sharingan, which is terrific. I'm still kind of getting my head around it. There's a few formatting issues that I haven't understood yet, but anyway. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're all washing your hands and staying indoors as much as you can. Staying sane. And we'll see you in the next office hours and in the next video.